Miss Rosario. It happened in a small town of no more than 5,000 people, and I go there for periods of time to help my family work the land they own. I leave my little shop in the city in the hands of my sister, and I always go there. I like to experience this contrast, and I like to feel part of the traditions and customs that many consider to be from the past, but which are still very much alive in many rural communities in the country. I had been here for about a week when Ignacio, a friend of my sister's who is a little younger than me but who for some reason has always been very fond of me, saw me. He promised to see me again when he finished his day's work, and so he did. Around 7 in the afternoon he came to the house to chat with me and my grandmother and drink some coffee. Although we're friends, I didn't understand his need to spend almost 2 hours trying to make conversation with us and leave around 9 o'clock. What was even stranger was the fact that the next day he came back at the exact same time. I didn't really have time to chat because there was so many things that needed to be done, so I left him alone this time. This didn't seem to bother him, and he sat there as if nothing was wrong. I asked my grandma what was up with him, to which she answered, "He's probably waiting to go and talk to Anita," she said assuredly, "but you know how Miss Rosario is. He waits for the hag to fall asleep and then goes and starts talking to the girl at the window." I was surprised by what my grandmother said. I didn't even remember that Miss Rosario had daughters. I probably never saw them. She probably never let her leave the house. Miss Rosario is also pretty weird. She lived a little further down the road from my grandmother, about 2 blocks away, but most of the little houses between her house and ours were almost empty. When I was a child, the street continued beyond the lady's house, and further in the distance we played soccer. But she scared us a lot. Everyone said she was a witch, and we made sure that our ball never went near her house. When we came back to the town, we were always making noise, but always made sure to stay as quiet as possible when walking by her house. The windows on her house were always dark, as if she had black curtains, and even in hot weather her windows would remain shut, unlike the other houses in the town. She had no animals or farmland, so no one knew what she lived off of or how she made money. Well, now it turned out that she had a daughter, and Ignacio was crazy about her. He had somehow seen her and fell in love. The next day Ignacio arrived on time again. He supposedly came to chat.
"Don't act dumb, I know why you're actually here,"
I said.
"But hey, stay here a while, help us with dinner, and you can leave later after a meal."
Ignacio looked at his feet. Feeling a little bit embarrassed, he agreed. When the clock struck 9 he said his goodbyes and was on his way. He had no horse, he couldn't afford one, but he grabbed his bike and pedaled off into the darkness. Those houses near Miss Rosario's house do look creepy at this time of night, considering they were abandoned. No more than half an hour had passed when we heard some strange noises coming from outside. It was Ignacio who was shouting for help. I quickly ran outside since my grandma had already fallen asleep. I saw Ignacio trying to pedal away. He fell off his bike. I could see something chasing him from the darkness. It was a large turkey who had been following him. And when I say large, I mean large. It's probably one of the biggest turkeys I've ever seen. The turkey kept pecking at him, and poor Ignacio was squirming on the ground trying to get away. I ran back inside the house to search for something that I could use to help Ignacio, be it a stick or a broom. But when I left the house, I saw Ignacio kicking the turkey while it was on the ground as if he was fighting for his life, and then the turkey was able to strike him back. Ignacio punched the turkey, but instead of retreating, the turkey just stared at him. When I ran up to it, shouting with the stick in hand, the animal ran off into the darkness. I laughed at him, but not before scolding him for using violence against an animal instead of scaring it off. He showed me the damage that the turkey had caused him.
"What animal? That was that old hag Miss Rosario,"
he said. Then Ignacio began to cry. I took him to my grandmother to help clean his wounds. I asked him why he had said something like that.
I'll tell you why. I had just jumped over that hag's fence when I saw something huddled in the corner of the chicken coop. It was Miss Rosario, but before I could react she lunged at me. I closed my eyes and next thing I knew I was being pecked at by a giant turkey. I tried to escape but it chased me,
he said while sobbing. I couldn't help but burst out laughing, but I immediately went quiet when I noticed my grandma's serious face. Don't get involved with that lady, or her family, she said as she cured his wounds. Right now you're safe, but next time my grandson won't be there to scare her away. She continued.
Yes ma'am, I won't get near that place ever again,
he answered. When he was better, I took him home in my truck. Is that hag really a witch? I asked but he didn't answer. But here comes the weird part of my story. I felt uneasy after what he had described, an undescribable fear that shook me to my core, so much so I don't go outside at night whenever I visit my grandma. The next morning I heard a voice cursing up a storm. When I looked out the window I saw Miss Rosario limping down the street with a cane in her hand. She had bruises on her arms and legs. I was peeking through a small gap in my window and I swear she turned and looked at me. She didn't even stop cursing. She went to the local clinic to get treatment for her bruises. Ignacio disappeared from the town for a while. Some say they sent him to live with his uncles in the city. You know, just in case that hag tried anything. The Window Witch. Hello, good afternoon or good morning. My name is Enrique and what I am about to tell you happened to me in 2010 in a small town called the Company of Jesus, municipality of Quechalac in Puebla. It all happened when my son was just born. He was barely 3 days old, and at that time we were living at my in-laws' house. It was a big 2-story house and while my wife was recovering, we were staying in a bedroom on the 2nd floor. But when the baby was born, we moved to the downstairs room, but to get there you have to leave the house and go through the patio. At the end of this there are some corrals where they put turkeys, chickens, and pigs. That first week my wife couldn't breastfeed the baby, nothing came out, so the doctor told us to feed him with a baby bottle. On a certain night I was walking towards the kitchen and noticed a bright light on top of the animal corrals. I thought it was the light from the street lamp and I went back to the room and we fell asleep. At around 2 in the morning the baby woke up again and I went to the kitchen again to prepare his bottle. It seemed strange to me when I looked towards the corrals, the strange light was gone. The street lamp couldn't have disappeared, I thought. The full moon was out so you could see everything relatively clearly. On my way back I felt as if I were being watched. I casually looked up towards the roof, and I swear I saw a shadow crouching at the edge. I looked down as if I saw nothing. I thought it was my imagination and went to the bedroom to give him the bottle. The door to that bedroom was mostly glass so we could see outside and you could also see inside from the outside. I went inside with my back to that door. The 3 of us were in bed. We had the light on, but it was covered with cardboard so that the light wouldn't shine directly on us and we could sleep. After a while my wife woke me up very panicked, asking me about the baby. I managed to calm her down and told her that the baby was fine, but she told me that in my dreams she could see the room and a dark hand with claws was dragging the baby towards the edge of the bed and take it away. Out of instinct I looked towards the door. I managed to see for a moment from the outside a giant turkey looking inward with its tongue hanging out as if it was savoring the baby. I yelled at my wife that it was a witch standing at the door. It filled me with rage and I told her that I would go into the 2nd floor bedroom to get my gun and kill her. My wife stopped me and told me not to leave them and instead to look for the scissors and put them in the shape of a cross in front of the door. I agreed and did just that. After a while that thing left us alone and we were able to go back to sleep. We never experienced anything similar after that. Beak nose. I want to tell you about my experience. It all happened one night when I stayed overnight at my aunt's house in Naucalpan in the state of Mexico. on one of those last streets that go down until you see the mountain in the Ejido de San Francisco Chimalpa. I don't want to say the exact street, but around there all the streets are named after countries. My aunt's house was located at the back end of her property, and she also had a smaller house made of aluminum sheets next to the street. One day around midnight a loud noise woke me up as if someone was jumping on the roof of the sheet metal house. I wasn't able to see the small house, but I was able to see the house in front. They had the lights on and were also looking towards the small house. I waved at them and it took them a while to see me. I rapidly turned the lights on and off so I could get their attention. When they finally noticed, I made a gesture that asked them what was going on. They pointed towards the roof of the small house. I went to wake up my aunt on the second floor. She was already awake by the time I got there. She told me to get in quickly. We opened the window hatch and to our horror there was a woman standing on the roof of the small sheet metal house, and before I could run away, my aunt calmed me down. Nothing's wrong, she's going back to the woods soon, although it's strange that they've come all the way down here, she said. Suddenly I started hearing a lady shouting obscenities. It was the woman from the other side of the street that was looking out the window. She was telling the woman on the roof to leave. The woman on the roof, however, ignored her and stared towards the hills. The woman from the house in front left her home with a broom in her hands and walked over towards the woman standing on the roof. This seemed to get that lady's attention. I wasn't able to see the lady too clearly, but I could see she had a mask on. It had a very large nose. It almost seemed to resemble a bird beak. My aunt grew worried over our neighbor since the lady was pretty old. She opened the window and also began yelling obscenities at the lady on the roof. The neighbors in front also began yelling at that lady as well. At that moment the woman just sat down. I went downstairs and called the police. I told them that there was a crazy woman was on the roof of my house and that she had been scaring the neighbors. The woman on the phone said that there was a nearby unit and if possible I should go stand at the corner of the street and wait for them there. I armed myself with courage and without telling anybody I snuck out of the house. While I was passing by the small house, I heard something moving at full speed towards me. When I looked up, that crazy woman was staring at me. It was then I noticed she wasn't wearing a mask. That was her actual face. Her face was wrinkled in an unnatural way. There was warts growing out of her nose. The woman was also very, very old. Her nose looked more like a beak than an actual nose. It was all I could stand before I bolted out the front gate. From a distance the patrol car was getting close. I frantically waved my arms to get their attention. They asked me where the woman was. I pointed towards my aunt's house. One of the officers left the car to inspect on foot. I heard the lady across the street shouting, "She's getting away." The officers turned on their searchlights and began to go down the street in an attempt to find that woman. They eventually reached the entrance to the woods. According to the officers, they searched for quite a while, but couldn't find anything. Strange thing was that there was also a pretty big cliff and there was no way she could have made it around fast enough to get away. The noises outside the house. You know, when my brother was little there were few nights when a witch didn't visit us. My mom and I were left alone with him, because my dad worked at night. One time we even heard a witch trying to open our window. We lived in a very small house on a very large plot of land, so there was no way to ask the neighbors for help. That time we made a ruckus yelling at the thing to leave us alone. We pretended it was a thief. We also yelled at my dad to get the gun to scare the supposed thief. Not like my dad actually had a gun or was there at the moment. But the thing started coming back almost every night. We would have to stay awake almost until morning to make sure the thing actually left. My mom didn't say anything to my dad about this because he had just gotten this job and we really needed the money. He would only last in a job around 2 months before this thing would come and find us. We began to hear this thing's heavy breathing. it was at that moment we realized it was a woman. This woman would also run around outside and sometimes complained as if she were a ghost trying to scare us. One day my mom told the lady at the store about our situation. This lady didn't live too far away from us. The lady told us to tough it out and that the thing would probably go away. She gave my mom a list of herbs that according to her were worth having and others that she could plant around the house. She told us to take advantage of that thing being in a weekend state. When my mom got home she planted the other herbs around the house as well. We planted them very carefully and as was custom around midnight we were woken up. This time we weren't woken up by tapping on the windows or noises coming from the roof of our house. We were instead woken up by screams of rage coming from outside. I even looked out from the door of our little house, but I couldn't see anything. The next day we saw how all the plants had been trampled. The ones that hadn't been trampled were replanted and we went to buy more the next day. Some of you aren't going to find this scary, but for me it was the most horrifying part. On the very last night, that thing stood at the top of our house and I swear it laughed like a witch straight out of those old cartoons. She laughed for an hour straight. We were horrified. We were about to call my dad to come and get us, when suddenly we heard a loud thud as if something heavy hit the roof, and after that, silence, absolute silence. We couldn't sleep after that anymore. I think I fell asleep around 4 in the morning. Nothing strange happened after that. We never heard from whatever that thing was ever again. My mom was close to convincing my dad so we could move again, but after weeks of tranquility she didn't try to convince him anymore. When we moved out of that house years later it was because we could finally afford something better. We thankfully never heard from that thing or woman ever again. But now that I'm pregnant I hope I don't have to relive that experience ever again.